I think that many kids, certainly I, and when I talk to kids in foster care today, walk around with a deep sense of shame, a deep sense of responsibility for what's happened. One of the things I talk about in the book is when I was in elementary school, kids would come up to me and say, "Where'd you come from? You arrived really out of the blue. What are your parents' names? What do they do?" And those questions really, though very simple, required impossible answers from me. And actually, that continued all the way through college. There were times in college when I'd be asked, "So how many brothers and sisters do you have?" And you sit and you wonder, well, do I tell them that actually I was an only child, that my mom only had me, or do I count the children of my foster parents, or do I go ahead and I count all of the foster children that I saw stream in and out of that house that I lived in? Even deeper than that, though, is a loneliness that never quite goes away. Sometimes when I talk to folks who've lost a parent or a child, they talk about a process of mourning that over time diminishes, but never quite leaves you. And I think that that's something that is a feeling of growing up in foster care and one of its legacies. Well, I certainly get asked a lot, how do you get from foster care to Harvard Law School? And it isn't easy, but I think that the reasons are actually remarkably simple. I think that first, I had wonderful, wonderful teachers who simply did their job and cared desperately to do their job well, and whom I knew were going to do their job in a dependable, honest way. I think also, in my case, I stayed in the same home. I wasn't moved over and over and over again. And what that meant was that I knew where I was going to bed each night, I knew where I was going to wake up, but I also knew where I was going to go to school. I also knew that I was going to see the same teacher. I knew that I was going to see the same people, that there was some continuity in my life. I think it's very, very difficult to have any sort of success in a life that lacks all continuity. I think also that I have to say that the memory of my mom, that unlike, I think, some kids, I never forgot that my mom loved me. And though I spent the majority of my childhood without her, that memory helped me believe in myself and allowed me to get through situations and to carry on. Actually, there were a lot of wonderful things that came out of Hope's Boy that aren't in the book. And I mean, they're mostly very personal things. One of the things that was really extraordinary was that I managed to track down an old social worker of mine. And this is a woman who actually knew me when I was 7, 8, and I think maybe up to 9 years old. And that's an extraordinary feeling for me because there's really no one that I can go to ask, what was I like as an 8-year-old? In fact, she is the only social worker whose name I remember as an adult. She is the social worker whom years later, when I was in 12th grade and my foster family was threatening to throw me out of the house, just a few months before I was about to graduate and leave, she was the one who I called from school, begging and pleading for her to do something to get them to change their minds so that I could finish school and so that my chances of going on to college wouldn't be hurt. She was a woman who did her job and who left a mark that said, I care about you. And she was one of the few people who did that, and I will always, always be appreciative of that. What I'm working on now is what Hope's Boy really begins with, and that is the story of a lawsuit that I worked on shortly after I graduated from law school, which was a civil rights suit in the state of Alabama, where I represented, as the most junior counsel in an immense case, a group of boys who were incarcerated in the state's largest mental facility for children. And the story really is about what became of those boys who I knew, who I talked to, some of whom testified at trial, and where their lives took them after that lawsuit. The lawsuit was actually successful in the end, but what ultimately became of them. So I spent quite a bit of time down in my old haunts of Montgomery and Birmingham and Eufaula and Tuscaloosa, and hunting down these kids, and also, unfortunately, a considerable amount of time in Alabama state penitentiaries as well, where some of them ended up. Writing Hope's Boy, oddly, wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, and I think that there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think the biggest is that I had carried these memories and these stories inside of me for so long. These were really the treasures of my childhood, and I would think of them, I'd sometimes repeat them to myself aloud, and so writing them down wasn't as much of a struggle as I think you might assume. And even though some of the scenes are heartbreaking to me and hard for me, they're scenes that are so much a part of me that describing them was easier than one might think. I think for other people, I think that they may take away different things. I think some take away a better understanding of what foster care in this country is really like. I think some are reminded of their own loss and the effect that that can have, their own loss of a parent perhaps as a child. I think some remember the love that they had for their parent and their own refusal to give up that love and how they held on to that. I think finally also it's an inspiring story. It's a story for me, again it goes back to something personal. It's a story that I think ultimately taught me that no matter what the odds or how dark or bad or harsh things may seem to be in life, that ultimately there are very few things in life that cannot be mended, that cannot be made right in their own way. And that's why I wrote it, and I suppose that's what I'd also like people to leave the book with.